Hi folks. So occasionally I like to talk about books that I've read. I think I'm going to do that maybe more often here on YouTube. I've clocked up about 50 in 2021, which is something of a record for me, although a lot of them have been small books. I'm not so much a great fan of large books these days because too often you get maybe 300 pages in and you keep thinking it's going to get better, it's going to get better. And it doesn't, but there's already been a significant investment of time getting that far. So if you don't make it the whole way to the end of the book at page 500, 600, 700, then all that time invested was wasted, you know. I think the only book that I ever read that I just forced myself to read the whole way through, and it was a big one, 600 odd pages, was Mission Earth Volume 1, The Invader's Plan by L. Ron Hubbard. Yeah, the L. Ron Hubbard of Scientology. Little did I know. But he's also known as a science fiction author. It was just a really bad book. Kind of Flash Gordon-esque, but I like Flash Gordon. I did not like this book. Anyway, this is not a review of an L. Ron Hubbard book. I want to talk about the last book I read, which was Duma Key by Stephen King. And although it's unusual for me, it's a large one. And I decided to read it for a couple of reasons. I remember starting it a long time ago when it first came out. I think I borrowed a friend's copy and I maybe read 1 or 2 chapters. I liked it, but for some reason I got distracted and I let it go and I never really continued reading it. But I always remember that it was about a guy who loses his arm, a guy called Edward Fremantle, who loses his arm in a terrible accident involving him in a car and a collision with a crane that crushes him and the car. He suffers brain damage, he has to get a hip replacement, and he loses his entire right arm. So this is right at the start of the novel, and I know the novel is about him. It's written in the first person. That beginning always stuck with me. It was a book I always kind of thought I'll come back to that at some point. And the reason I've come back to it now is because I suffered a serious injury of my own. Not to that extent, but in the same place, right here in my shoulder. Some of you will have seen the video that I made about this after it happened in January 2021. I guess I can show you the scar that I'm left with here. I fell off my bicycle, and can you see that there? Yeah, right the whole way up there, big scar, because they had to open me up and fit a metal plate in here in order to put the bones back in place. 3-part fracture to the right front humerus, and of course it's the right arm that I use. I'm not left-handed, so I was immobilized. You know, for the first 6 weeks I had my right arm in a sling after the operation. Couldn't move anything, had to do everything with the left hand. You know, something so simple as opening a pack of cheese. You know the cheese that has like the resealable pack? You know, just trying to get that open again with, I've basically got one hand and I've got my teeth. And started having to use scissors instead of a knife, because yeah. So anyway, that was the first 6 weeks for me. Luckily I have a close friend who was able to take me shopping and help out in that regard. And of course I'm no good after the 6 weeks, because even though the arm comes out of the sling, it hasn't been moved in 6 weeks. So it's useless. And I had to begin a long period of gradual rehabilitation. And it's lasted all year. It's really only sort of stopped about a month ago. This is now middle of December. So I've been gradually getting better, but I've reached a peak with it. I will not get full movement back in the arm. You know, that's about it. You know, if I put my arms up like that, this one here will not, I can move that one up straight, I can't move that one up straight. I'm not what you'd call disabled, but it had pretty profound effect on me, dealing with the psychological stuff and also the physical stuff. Psychological in terms of, you know, regret and everything, and the stupidity of the accident, really, and stuff like that. And then just dealing with, you know, your life changes, at least temporarily, your life changes. And of course I'm nearing 50, and the 40s, if anyone's younger and doesn't realize it, the 40s are when you start getting pretty creaky and you start noticing it. And we have conversations, you know, me and my friends and stuff, and we talk about how we're basically starting to fall apart now. And this is, I'm telling you all this because this kind of comes up in the book, and it's what makes the book really good. It starts off all about this guy Edgar Fremantle having to remake his life. The brain damage and everything, it costs him his marriage, because he ends up grabbing his wife by the throat, because he's just not in his right frame of mind. He's so frustrated that language won't work correctly. He has to get his brain working differently in order to get the right words to come out. So there's all this psychological and physical rehabilitation that he has to go through. So part of it is he goes to this place called Duma Key, and it's Key as in the Florida Keys. So this is a little small island inhabited by very few people in the Florida Keys, and he has this really nice house that he rents for, I think he has the rental for a year, and he learns to paint, and it's a skill that he didn't know he had. And a really warm friendship develops on the island between himself and the island's two other inhabitants, which are a guy called Wireman, who has a serious injury of his own to deal with in the past, and an old woman who has lived there all her life and who's getting Alzheimer's. So it's really a story about damaged people dealing with their damage, learning to try and make the best of life with that damage. And all that was really, really interesting, and I related a little bit, you know, I related to it. The characters just leapt off the page. Stephen King has a knack for that, but it was more meaningful to me in this book than it has been in many others, just purely because of what I went through with my accident. But of course it's a Stephen King novel, and like most Stephen King novels, there's something horrific and supernatural in the background. And that's where it kind of, it's the only downside of the novel that I'll really tell you about, and I don't want to give too much away, but as we were getting towards the final quarter of the novel, it became clear that it's just another story about a senseless, evil, supernatural entity. And how many times has he done it before? I started to think, I mean, Pennywise the clown in It, right? It's just a supernatural entity that just loves mischief and mayhem, you know. It's the same could be true of the thing in the novels Desperation and The Regulators, that thing called Tack, right? Maybe even you could say the same of the vampire in Salem's Lot. Maybe not, I'm not sure, but what else? There's got to be others. Yeah, I recently read The Outsider. Again, it's another novel about a senseless supernatural entity that's just pure evil. And I don't relate to that in my fiction because it's the kind of fright that affects a child. You know, the monster in the closet sort of thing. And I just don't relate to that kind of horror anymore. I prefer the horror to come from within human beings. You know, I'm more scared of the evil inside myself than I am about things that go bump in the night or supernatural entities from some other plane that I just can't really think exist in any capacity. Yeah, so I mean, I'll not tell you what it's about really, but that's where it started to get disappointing. And you know, I realized it was going to be just like, you know, with a vampire, you got to exploit the vampire, find out and exploit the vampire's Achilles heel, where it's sunlight, it's crosses, etc. So yeah, here we have a supernatural entity with a couple of Achilles heels that can be exploited, and off we go to try and kill it before it kills us. It's the usual old story. So without telling you how it goes, you know, I just kind of was reading the last quarter of the novel thinking, okay, let's just get this done. And it wasn't bad, but it just was so inferior to the first 3/4 of the novel, where I just got so into the characters. So that's Duma Key, an interesting story about broken people. And this is maybe why, you know, some of Stephen King's best work, in my opinion, are ones that don't involve anything supernatural. Think of The Shawshank Redemption as an example. I would also include his really short novel Rage, which was collected in the Bachman books. That's one of my favorite pieces of writing from Stephen King, even though he did it really early in his career. And it's a controversial one because it's about a school shooting. But Stephen King has a real knack for characters and for how people feel inside themselves. You can really relate to the people in his books. So yeah, I give Duma Key a recommendation, sort of, if you know what I mean. Let's say 3.5 out of 5 stars. And I forgot to mention at the start that another reason why this book fascinated me is because I'm aware of a terrible accident that Stephen King himself suffered at the hands of a bad driver. He was a pedestrian at the time, and he got run over by a guy driving a van or something and had to go to intensive care. This happened way back in the 1990s, and I can remember one of my friends sending me a text telling me this has happened to Stephen King. He writes about it, actually, I recall, in his book On Writing. There's a section at the back where he talks about what he went through with that accident, and it was pretty severe. So Stephen King knows about pain and about recovery and rehabilitation. So I gotta think, although he hasn't lost an arm, I gotta think to a large extent he's writing from experience here. And again, that's why I wanted to read it. I wanted some sympathy, not from other human beings, but I wanted to read about the experience of someone else who'd been through bodily trauma. Yeah, and it did deliver. The book did deliver. Alright folks, till next time, take care. The sky